Hi, is this Dave?
Aloha, brother. It is good to hear your voice.
You too. Have we spoken before, Dave?
Yeah, you've been here. Let's see. We did a couple things in the dressing room over at the Blaisdell one time with Jerry and you and me. It was 2011. Then we did that again in 2017. So we've met a couple times, and you've been on the
Wow.
phone.
I'm,
Yeah, I've been
my
talking.
my memory is shot now. Now I've turned 71 actually.
Exactly right.
Don't tell anybody.
Cool.
I'm on my cell up here in Oregon, where we live. My wife and I moved to Oregon.
Oh wow, that's huge. Well, let's get into that. It's your first time back with us now in 6 years. So first, a big aloha and mahalo, of course, and great to have you
Right.
back on with us. We appreciate it, Dewey.
Well, thank you, Dave. It's always a special treat to come to Hawaii. Of course, we've had a long history of coming to Hawaii, and I have relatives there, and I mean it's just a special place. So we're all excited to come back.
That's huge, and now Oregon. Now the last time we had Jerry on once during the pandemic, and Jerry told us about what he was up to. But then he also was telling us a little bit about what you had been up to, and he said that you had been with horses and stuff, I guess, in Wisconsin at the time, and now you're in Oregon. Is that the story?
Well, we have one horse. Yeah, my wife and I adopted a wild Mustang. It's been 5 years now. I
Wow.
think we're in the sixth year. From up outside of Reno, Nevada, they have a facility there where they kind of round up herds of these wild Mustangs, and the public can purchase them, or they have to be relocated or whatever. It's a big issue actually in some ways, but yeah, we got one of those because my wife had a horse when she was younger, and so we took the plunge, and coincidentally, as we're speaking right this minute, within the last hour, we've just put her into the barn that we had to build here in Oregon. 4 months ago, she went into a boarding facility where she traveled to twice a day to go take care of her and clean her stall and feed her. And today, that's come to an end because the barn is finally finished and she's in her own stall. So it's
Oh,
another day of celebration for us.
say that one more time. You cut out there.
I say it's another day to celebrate that our horse is in her own barn now.
That's awesome. And I've read a little bit about I didn't know there was just one, but I had read it was a wild horse, which is fascinating. And this horse does have an interesting name considering Dewey's famous song, A Horse with No Name. Explain the name.
Well, the girls came up with it. It's Noname, no name, as one word, pronounced Nonami. Nonami.
That's pretty
Yeah,
outrageous.
most people see it and they say no name. Well, no, but it's pronounced Nonami. It's a trick name, but yes, it is an homage to the song, of course, and so be it.
And you guys migrated, so you have places in Wisconsin and Oregon, or you just moved and picked up roots from.
Well, the Wisconsin place we've had for 20 plus years since our marriage, and that's just a cottage on a lake, which is really beautiful, and we love it. But I lived 50 plus years in California up until we moved here in November to Oregon after spending 6 months looking for a place and doing what you do, and it is a big change. It's different after years in the sunny Southern California, but we're loving it. We're adapting, and today's a big day because the horse is now with us. So we've completed
That's huge,
our
man.
little family.
That's great. And a wild horse. Any reason that you wanted to adopt a wild horse? Maybe I guess that does fit the image for America in so many ways.
Well, I got to say, I was not the instigator of the horse to begin with. Yes, I wrote the song, but I was never a horse person as a child or in our travels as a family, my nuclear family with my brother and sister and mother and father. So I never knew anything about horses. In fact, I was never that really, excited being around horses or any animal that's that big and cumbersome. So it was a big step for me. I mean, I love animals. I love being in the water and scuba diving and snorkeling. That's another reason I love Hawaii. And and I've been in the water with the biggest animals, but a horse is a big thing. It takes a training, and this one being wild. The reason my wife Penny got involved in some of the wild horse organizations and stuff to try and help save them, because a lot of them go to slaughter or or abused or whatever happens. So she just got involved with that, and one thing led to another, and we decided to rescue. It's not really rescuing, it's adopting.
Sure.
The people that take care of those herds are very sensitive. They work for the Bureau of Land Management. Most of them are cowboys themselves and young people that like to work with horses and know what they're doing. So it's not like we rescued them from those guys, but we did adopt one.
That's really neat. And is that the only major, you guys have other critters around, or is that it?
Oh, yeah, we've got a dog, of course, and 4 cats, and a large tortoise, an African sulcata tortoise. It's potentially the second largest tortoise in the world, but behind the Galapagos tortoise, the famous Galapagos tortoise. So she weighs about 65 or 70 pounds already, and she'll outlive us.
What's her name?
Hopefully that's the end of the animals, Dave.
What's her name?
That's another confusing name. We simply call her Turtle Girl. She's not a turtle. She's a tortoise. But we had named what we thought was a male, Moby, at the time. And this was a younger daughter named Moby. And then someone who knew what they were talking about looked at our tortoise and said, this is a female. And so our daughter said, "Oh, Turtle Girl, Turtle Girl." So that stuck. It's
nice.
A mouthful.
It is. Where's Turtle Girl now? Is she a part of the interview or somewhere else on the?
No, she's with us up here.
Okay.
We're a complete family unit now with the 4 cats, the tortoise, the dog, and the horse, and then Penny and I, my wife Penny.
It's a great thing, and now really the horse story so fits the America folklore, and on that note of just the kind of. When I think of America, it has a very relaxing. It is in a way like comfort food or comfort music. It makes me remember easier times, and so I think of the same sort of when you mentioned your wife a few times. Do you sit around and just play and sing for her casually, or when you're not touring, do you really need a break from that sort of stuff?
I don't do that on a regular basis. I'll be strumming in the room a little bit. I've never been that. Yes, when I was younger, when the band was first starting, I'd get up in the morning, be playing. They'd always be working on a new song. I mean, we had projects that we had to do. We were contracted to make an album a year, and touring, and the lifestyle was a lot more hectic. I strum a little bit. We'll sit and play some old music on Spotify or something, but we do a lot of other things.
Sure. No, it makes sense.
The music still consumes me in the sense that we're still working and we're still traveling. So, like, I'll be leaving tomorrow morning real early. I'll leave in dark to get to the Portland airport and fly out to Ohio, and we have some shows this weekend. And I just got back a couple days ago from where the heck did I come from?
But you keep it easy.
Rochester, New York. I remember Rochester, New York. But we still work quite a bit. COVID cut into everything.
Sure.
And we had a lot of makeup shows to do and a lot of new shows booked, and so I get all the music I need, at least my own music,
when you're working,
playing and singing on the road.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense, and it's a great explanation. And you've done that. You've been there and done that. How did you first, when we think, a lot of the times, you guys have a fascinating history, and you've been on a bunch of times. Jerry's been a whole bunch of times. And certainly in Hawaii, that history would be maybe even more relevant because we have such a strong military connection. So the three guys first get together, Dan Peake and Jerry Beckley and Dewey Bunnell. They're in the UK. Their parents are fathers in the Air Force. And so how did you first, before we hear a little bit more about them, how did you get introduced to the guitar itself?
That's a good one. That's a good question, because that's really where everything started for me. That was like 1963. What was I, in the 7th or 8th grade? And we were on a base. It was an Air Force base in California, coincidentally. By the way, my dad was the only of the three of us, Jerry, Dan, and I, because our band is associated heavily with California rock or California folk rock or whatever, because we kind of came up with the Eagles and Jackson Browne, and we were all in the same office. So there's this California thing, but in reality, none of us had really lived in. Jerry and Dan's family had never been in California, and my dad had been stationed at 2 different locations in California, so a total of 2 years. So we weren't typical Californians. But what was the question again?
Of how you got introduced to the guitar and that.
Oh, the guitar, yeah. So it was in California, and there was a kid down the block who had one that he didn't really play much, and we were goofing around and playing what kids did in those days. We used to catch snakes and lizards and stuff. And I just picked up that guitar and kind of fiddled around with it, and he said, I think, as I could recall, he said, you can take it home if you want. I don't play it, because he just lived down the block. And I basically just I'm self-taught. I wish I'm telling your listeners who are maybe younger, I wish I had actually taken some formal training, learned a little bit about music theory, but instead I just learned by ear the things that I wanted to play, which is essentially instrumental surf music in those days, the Ventures and Dick Dale and the Deltones and the Safaris and the surf bands, and then that morphed a little bit into the Beach Boys music as soon as they started. But, I'd learn a handful of songs like House of the Rising Sun or something, and learned a few chords. And it just carried me along to where I met some other guys who played, and they teach me another chord or work out a song together. And I had a little band in the 8th grade when we moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, and we played in the talent show or a couple things. But I didn't have a good, solid musical foundation. So I'd look at chord charts. Once I learned a handful of good chords, I mean, essentially, it's a numbers, it's a math game, and music is interesting once you get the formula, of which I still have some mystery chords. I haven't broken the formula. You can really accompany yourself, and then I like to sing. Once I could play a few chords and sing on top of that, I think I leaned more into singing and lyrics, and I was essentially just accompanying myself on the guitar, never becoming a virtuoso or anything. But, when you get into a band, that's why I prefer bands. I've never wanted to be a solo artist. I don't have a solo record or anything. You bounce off each other. And then when you're writing your own songs, then you don't have to listen. You don't have to learn anything new. You wrote the thing.
Right.
And in the process of arranging, like with Jerry and Dan and I, that's where the songs really came together. We bring the skeleton song to the other 2 guys, most of the time with fully formed verses and choruses and lyrics. And then we would hash out the vocal parts and the other guitar parts, and in certain circumstances, build in a bridge, or if the bridge wasn't already written. Jerry was always good at providing a bridge for some of my songs when I could get, verse, chorus, and then he could help with a bridge. But I wrote a lot of bridges myself. We basically wrote all of our songs that are credited to each one of us were pretty much written by the guy who wrote it. But as time went on, we would help each other a little more. But so that's pretty much my musical history in terms of playing guitar. We always had cheap acoustic guitars in the beginning, and then went electric, and then of course when we got successful, we expanded on all of that stuff.
The when did you guys relocate to? So it's interesting. So the development of first the guitar, and then it sounds like the singing was just this organic thing to kind of accompany the guitar. Who would know then it would go on to be this voice that decades and decades and decades later is so important to so many people and gives them hope and nostalgia, and they reminisce. But when you explain moving to England and then Jerry and Dan coming into your life, because it sounds like you were already like prepared with the guitar and the singing.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I took that guitar with me when our family moved around after the California thing in '63. We moved to various other bases, and it was always that thing that I had in my room. It's a great thing. You don't have to be a professional or a virtuoso, but it's like anything. It's like a hobby or a sport or tennis, whatever you do. That's what I did in my room. So yeah, when I got to England, and I think I was a sophomore in high school, and my dad was stationed at a base in northern England for the first year we were there before we went to London, where I met Jerry and Dan. And at that base, there were some other kids I played with. We were just picking apart whatever top 40 records there were, or there were lots of kids who had guitars and played. I mean, I've come from that era, the 60s, kids who grew up in the 60s with the whole explosion of popular music, the British invasion, the American bands. By the time we graduated from high school in 1969, we'd been exposed to the whole Beatle catalog and all those bands and all that music, and it took over our lives. I mean, that's what we did. We were waiting with bated breath for the next release of the bands we loved, and it was a wave of music that's what we lived for, and the culture that came along with it. Of course, the whole British thing, and dare I say, the hippie movement. We were very much part of that counterculture Woodstock generation when we were 18, 19, 20 years old, and we were inspired by all the music that we listened to. But singing harmony and writing our own songs, that's what we really wanted to do. It didn't take long after we rearranged California Dreamin' or something and put in some of our own touches that it morphed into writing our own songs. You just stepped right into that.
So you were a sophomore in high school when you met Jerry and Dan?
I was a junior by then. The sophomore year
in the other place, right?
I was in a different school. Then my dad got stationed down to London, and the London school was not on a military base per se.
Huh.
The other one was, but our school also had civilian kids, because there would be civilian American families that wanted their kids, to go to American school. It was actually a full-on American school for non-military also, but so that's where we all congregated, and everybody came from different walks of life. They were in the same thing military-wise, but they were living in different states, different countries, and so it was a real melting pot.
Yeah, That's such a great melting pot, such a great word, because I was doing some research, Dewey. That's so funny you said that, because over the years of having you on, I've never really asked stuff about the late Dan Peek, who, as we've been talking here, along with Jerry, the guy who co-founded the band. And as of melting pot, like he and his family, unless I read this wrong, they had been in Pakistan before his Air Force dad was reassigned to England, where you and Jerry were.
Yeah, that's right. Jerry's family had come from Germany. I know they were in Kaiserslautern, where we have U.S. bases, and Dan was in Pakistan. I think they'd also lived in the Philippines or Japan.
Wow.
Our family never lived anywhere but England, separate from the U.S. So that was our first. But it should be noted that both Jerry and I have British mothers. Our dads married British ladies who became our mothers. So England was already a topic in our family and my mother when we moved there in '66. We immediately went and visited all our British grandparents and relatives there, and so we settled in very nicely into England in that sense.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. So that connection was already there for you prior. So you're saying prior to
Yeah.
moving there, your mother, you had this English connection. You're saying that had already been there.
Yes, and Jerry and I compared notes when we first met in that regard. And yeah, and our mothers still made tea at home and British recipes and talked about their own lives in England. So we almost had a built-in connection to England when we got there. And a lot of it did look like the way my mother described it and so on. It was rainy, and speaking of rain, we get that up here in Oregon. But it was, it was everything we kind of expected. It was the 60s, so being in London itself, London proper, was a lot different than where my mother was from in Yorkshire, which was in northern England. That was more quaint, more typically British country pubs and sheep farms and whatever, whereas London, of course, was swinging London. It was 66, 67, 68, whatever. It was all happening. Carnaby Street and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's funny because I was curious. Like, what is the stuff you would do together? Having that as your playground, your backdrop, whatever you want to call it, London at that time, no less. Other than music, are there any fun memories you remember as a trio? You and Dan and Jerry doing some just activities that you might get into there.
Well, one thing right away, there was a little bit more independence than I was used to. Of course, we were getting older. We were in our teens, mid-teens. But the public transport system was so great in London. The tubes and the buses,
right,
and the London cabs and all this stuff, and it was cheap. And so we lived kind of outside of central London, but these tube lines, they spiderweb all around the greater London area, so you could jump on a tube and be right down in the middle of Oxford Circus or Piccadilly Square or, Buckingham Palace, you name it. You could do and just jump back on the tube and get home. So there was a lot of independence that way, and we did go to lots of concerts, the Royal Albert Hall and the Royal Festival Hall, and
like you three together. What a great sight. These are the guys who would go on to make the tune. So can you remember, like, you and Dan and Jerry, like the three of you, any specific show you can just remember looking around and going, wow?
Well, you may be aware of the club on Wardour Street called the Marquee Club.
Sure.
Famous, small club, little sweaty club with a bar, a little stage, but all these great bands. There's the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix. People actually broke on that little stage. And we would go there and see a show now and then. Yes, I remember we're just starting, and but we saw King Crimson. King Crimson at that time was kind of a real prog band with Robert Fripp and Greg Lake, who went on to be with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and
yep.
And I do remember specifically we went just to see this new band the first night at that club. They were doing a week, and we went like 5 nights in a row, and just kind of blew our minds.
Wow!
The band on stage, they were great. But I do remember that as a shared experience.
That's such a great. Well, that's a perfect. That's exactly, that ticks the box. So the three of you, you specifically remember their faces, the two of them with you, and going 5 nights to see King Crimson at the Marquee.
Yeah, exactly. We did.
That is.
We would go down. Jerry and I would go. At first, after we graduated, by the way, Dave, in 1969, June of 69, we did break up in the sense that Dan did go back to college. He went to Old Dominion in Virginia.
Huh.
So, our parents, we were still dependents of our parents. And his family wanted him to go to college, and he wanted to go to college. And, of course, most kids thought, what are you going to do? They still feel that way. Where are you going to go? So Dan left, and that left Jerry and I. We bonded a bit more at that point. And this was right on the cusp of us writing our own material. So Jerry and I spent more time going down into London, going to music stores or basically just hanging around in Hyde Park. And
How did Dan return? Explain that then, because I didn't even know. This is an interesting facet of it.
How did what? Explain that?
How did Dan return then from being in Virginia and having left? How did he come back and then you guys become the America Band?
Well, okay. I think he just burned out we did one semester. So now you're up to whatever it is, December of 1969. And he came back. At that point, both Jerry and I had gotten jobs on the base. They would, you could hire you for minimum wage, and we worked in the warehouse. Dan's dad, his dad was still there on base. He was still a serving Air Force colonel, and he ran the food services, like the cafeteria, the commissary, snack bar on base. So we got jobs working we got jobs in the warehouse first, and then when Dan came back, his dad got us jobs working in the cafeteria, like flipping burgers and dishwashing. So we were trying, we were still having to live a little bit.
Sure.
At that point too, my father was in the process of retiring from the Air Force and moving as a civilian back up to Yorkshire, where my mother was from, and he decided to retire there with my mom and my sister and brother. My brother actually was still in high school. He stayed in London at a boarding U.S. school, not the one that we were at. This is a little confusing, but there was another American school that you could board at.
Wow.
And I started living with a family I graduated from high school with there. It was a short amount of time. It was a matter of months. But so Dan comes back. Dan's still living at his home where his parents were to begin with. Jerry's with his parents. I'm with this family. The three of us are reunited at the base and working. And in our spare time, we're working on these songs we've been writing. Literally, sometimes at one of the parents' houses, or I bought a first car, a little 1950 Morris Minor. And we would literally sit in that car sometimes with the acoustic guitars. And the acoustics were good in the car. We could hear our voices. It's like being in a really
small studio.
Being in a vocal booth, in a recording studio. We could hear well and work out vocal parts on these songs that would ultimately be the first album.
What was the first tune? Do you remember the first song you guys wrote together?
I do. Well, the very first one that we worked up together it's on the first album. It's called Children. And the vocal harmonies on that song, Children, that's what we were really proud of. We were working on those vocal harmonies, and it was a song I wrote. And I think that's when we realized we had a good blend. Because in the high school band, the three of us weren't in it together. There was a band that Jerry was in first that I kind of joined for a minute, and I didn't really sing, and they were doing cover songs, and Jerry was the front man, and he would sing like By the Time I Get to Phoenix or Nights in White Satin. I remember the Moody Blues song. And then Dan was in a rock band, coincidentally called Genesis, before there was a real Genesis.
Wow.
So the three of us had never been in the band together, and we certainly hadn't been working on vocals. But we all rallied around Crosby, Stills, and Nash. We'd been listening to Buffalo Springfield, been listening to the Byrds. All of that was already ingrained in us, all those vocal harmonies. And, of course, the top of the pile was the Beach Boys, and the Beatles for that matter. But the Beach Boys harmonies were just ecstatic, beautiful, Pet Sounds and all of the songs were terrific. So we knew that was the path we wanted to follow, was to develop these vocal harmonies as a signature as best we could, because we were inspired by that stuff.
Was there
So
resistance? You mentioned the parents and the hippie thing. Was there, and it's so fascinating, you have these three families of military background, and was there resistance from your folks, Jerry's or Dan's, being military members, to you guys embarking on sort of the counterculture kind of journey that rock music was and is?
yeah, that's a good question. And you would think to the average person that being in military families, whatever that stigma or not is, would be, stay as far away from that. But no, I can honestly say my dad was supportive. He was kind of indifferent, to be honest. I think all of our parents thought, yeah, they'll grow out of this or whatever, but none of them stood in our way. I don't remember Dan or Jerry ever coming to me and go, say, my parents want me to go get a job and we got to stop this. I think the fact that we were so fortunate that we made connections fairly quickly and our future was set pretty fast. We met some influential people in London in the music scene right off the bat. We had a little bit of a shoe in the door or a leg up on other young British bands because we were Americans. That had a certain cachet or something different when we were going into offices speaking with a record company or a publishing company or something. We had that little bit of something. We always said that because none of us can specifically remember the exact minute we called the band America. We'd been going by the band name the Days, D-A-Z-E, because that was the last high school band that each of us had kind of been in. Like I said, we weren't all three in it at the same time, but Dan and I were both in the Days separately. So America, it kind of, I've always thought it was because we were Americans. We've always said that we sat in that cafeteria and there was a jukebox called the Americana, and we'd play Jefferson Airplane records or something. And I remember, but there's no specific time we went, there's the name, we're going to call it that, unanimously.
Right. It evolved sort of. That's great that you can't quite, that's kind of mystical that you don't really remember it.
Well, I can't. And I know whenever Dan or Jerry and I answered the question, none of us said, Dan said it or Jerry said it or Dewey said it first. I'm sure we did it at the same time. I don't know. How about America? Yeah, America. We were talking about Chicago. I remember Chicago had come out, that first album, CTA, in 68, I think. So that's, we're still in high school and we played that song and we absorbed the fact that you could call yourself the name of a city, which was, as silly as that is, that was a kind of an off-the-wall name for a band, although so many names were weird in those days.
That's a great point.
13th floor elevators, Strawberry Alarm Clock, Jefferson Airplane, all the names were all over the board.
No, that's a really interesting point too, and you've told the story really, really well. But that's a separate point about just names like that are a place kind of name, and that have whether it's America or Chicago or something like that. And when you think of Dan, we've never because we've lost him. Dan passed away in 2011, and he had left the band. And ironically, when he left the band to pursue like a religious path, and interestingly, when you take a look at some of that stuff, it's Dan was like, he's known as a pioneer in contemporary Christian music. Was his religious interest or background with that already a factor in his life when you guys were just buds before the band happened? Or talk a little bit about him as a person, because we don't have him anymore to hear from.
Yeah. Well, Dan was a really smart guy. He was a funny guy. I really enjoyed his company. We got along well. We were, like I said, the Three Musketeers when we bonded in school. But we did come from different backgrounds and different walks of life to some degree. My dad was an NCO, which is, and Jerry and Dan's dads were both officers. Believe it or not, that still is a strata. My dad would salute Jerry or Dan's dad.
Oh.
Dan's family was initially all from Missouri or thereabouts. I think Dan's dad and mom both were from Missouri, and there was a Southern Baptist thing, I think, going on there. Jerry's mother was Um, she was quite British, whereas my mom was more of a country lass from up in Yorkshire, I think. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but Jerry's mom was a little classier, if that's the right way to say it. So we all had different backgrounds, and religion was never part of that in terms of our day-to-day discussions or anything. Jerry and I, with British mothers, it's kind of this Church of England Protestant thing, and I always had a lot of guilt about not being a religious guy and not being raised that way, because certain bases, certain cities, certain states that we lived in, the kids were all going, "Hey, you're not going to church on Sunday?" That kind of thing.
Sure.
So Dan may have sort of squelched that fact that it was stronger in his family than we became aware of. Because I rarely ever heard him talking about his beliefs or his spirituality or his God. But then I do remember when the band got going and we were out there on the road in different places, and we might be confronted by, as we'd say, a Jesus freak kind of guy or somebody, giving us a Bible or a book or come this way. Dan always said, all you do is say that you're saved. Say you're saved, brother. So he already had the lingo. So I thought, Dan, good one. You got that. Yeah, okay, I'm saved, brother. So I don't know what I'm saying, Dave, but he definitely, when his life came to a crossroads after all the success and all the excess and all the money and all the fame, he was kind of brought to his knees, figuratively and emotionally, and he wanted to follow that path that I was very surprised that that had been bubbling under in his life.
Well, especially with the I'm saved, brother, with him already having that kind of attitude, I guess.
Yeah. So he'd had, I guess, in a nutshell, distilled down, he was raised with a pretty strong religious background, and as people do, when they have that, it's a source of comfort.
Sure.
And he needed that at that time in his life when he left the band.
And you supported him, right? Both of you guys were on like his first solo stuff, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a tough time for everybody at that moment, and we'd all been put, as we say, the spin dryer had spun us for those first 5 years or so, was because we had these so-called meteoric rise to our first album and first single and number one. We win the Best New Artist Grammy of '72. We're suddenly in a place we never could have in our wildest dreams expected, let alone planned for.
Amazing.
So it was exhilarating. It was mind blowing. It was fun.
But a lot to take in is what you're saying too. When you think about.
Yeah, I think so. And we'd never lived on our own before. Now we were within months. We did a tour of club dates in the U.S., starting in New York City at the bitter end, playing a week there in Greenwich Village, and ending at the Whiskey A Go Go. And after that 6 weeks, the record was number one in the U.S. And we flew back to London to all of the people that had got us started, and within weeks, if not less, we were propositioned by David Geffen for management back in the U.S. Wow. And we kind of jumped ship, and we packed our bags, and the guys had had a taste of Southern California, and we knew that we'd kind of used up everything. We didn't have a real manager in England. We had a de facto manager who was a DJ compere, very influential guy, and he got us in on the bills with huge bands. We opened for The Who and Pink Floyd, and did a tour of Cat Stevens. All of that was facilitated fantastically, but we didn't have true management. And Geffen had a good talk, and he managed Neil Young, and the Eagles were just starting. Joni Mitchell was in that office, and CSN, Jackson Browne, J.D. Souther, Linda Ronstadt. all the people we listened to. So we were like 19 and 20 years old. We were on the first plane back to L.A.
Unbelievable. I mean, can you even imagine? I mean, you're thinking back, David Geffen and this powerful guy, and he's about to
Yeah.
orchestrate your thing. And you've been real generous with your time. But just one more story, if we could get it, because you kind of brought us there. You guys come to the United States, and it wasn't that long. One of the big guys who we just lost, I don't have to tell you, a bunch of cats in the music business not long ago, David Crosby, and he
Yeah.
factors into your story. And if you could kind of like both explain how he factors in, and then share any just stories that are either riveting or fun, jaw dropping, or just make you laugh or smile from with David.
Well, yeah, it was pretty jaw dropping for us when we got out to L.A. We flew in. We were met by uh, David Geffen's assistant at the airport. We were squired around. There was also some Warner Brothers executives because they were our label. So Warner Brothers people, and now our new manager David Geffen, and so we had nowhere to live or anything, and we were like 19 and 20, and we moved into David Geffen's house with him, and he. Joni Mitchell was up there a lot playing the piano, and she would live there for weekends or travel around. I'm not sure what their arrangement was, but it was really great to have her there, and we knew her music. And Crosby came one day up to the house, and it was like, David Crosby, we love you guys, you know. And he said, yeah, well, that's obvious. He had that edgy sense of humor.
Is that what he said?
He
That's
was a
obvious.
really, you know, he was a great guy. I didn't, you know, it wasn't like we spent our days with any of those guys on a regular basis. But David was in and out of our lives, and he'd be in the office, and he'd be funny, and we never played with CSN or anything.
Wow.
In later years, we did shows with Graham, and we did a tour with Steven, opening for Steven Stills' band, and we saw. We did one show with David Crosby. It was a benefit. It wasn't that long ago, maybe 6 or 7 years. And it was really great. And we got to sing with David. We did Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, and we were backstage and working out vocals with him and stuff. And it was like a flashback to those early days in the early 70s. But it was sad but not unexpected. He was a tough old guy, David Crosby. He went through put his body through a lot.
Yep.
And, you know, everybody misses him. We met so many people, and it was a big family in that office. Even if you only saw somebody once a year, you'd see him, and you'd have this common bond with the Geffen and Roberts, Elliot Roberts, and David Geffen had a management firm called Lookout Management. And they were all big names, and they were all big touring names. So in those days, people were on the road for months at a time. Our very first tour, J.D. Souther was out with us, and then the second tour was Jackson Browne. And we still see them now and then. We did a show with Jackson whenever it was last year sometime. But, you know, so you're just there. You're aware of everybody's work. You listen to everybody's work. You're waiting for the next album by Neil Young or whoever. You know, it was a great thing. It seems like a long time ago now, but it was inspiring, and I'm really grateful for that experience. We were only with Geffen proper for 3 years, I think. It was through David Geffen that we were able to connect with George Martin, who subsequently produced
Bunch of
a
records.
total of 7 for us. And so a lot happened with David, but he's a very ambitious guy, and he was moving on into starting his own record label and ultimately moving into the movies and all of that. So the train was rolling along, you know, and everything was happening. And two of his under managers, he had half a dozen different managers in that office. Ultimately, Irving Azoff came into that office and brought Joe Walsh and Dan Fogelberg, and we got to Joe to play on our third album then. But all of those managers moved on, needless to say, Irving Azoff. But we had John Hartman and Harlan Goodman out of that office that that took us over, and they brought Crosby and Nash over because Crosby and Nash were a duo as well as being Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Right.
And they had Poco too, our dear friend Rusty Young, and Timothy Schmidt was in Poco in those days, and we did lots of tours with Poco. Timothy, of course, went on to join the Eagles. So it was a bit incestuous, all these bands and all this touring.
That's a great one on the first time you met Cross, though. So literally, you're like, "Oh, we love you," and his first remark is, "Well, that's obvious."
Yeah, that's obvious. Yeah, he was always a funny guy. I mean, he had a wry sense of humor, and he was larger than life, Crosby.
That's a great memory, great memory. And when the Warner Brothers, you never crossed paths in the Warner Brothers offices with like totally different Warner Brothers groups. Like, was Black Sabbath? Were you ever there at the same time Ozzy was in the office?
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time at the Warner Brothers offices, so I probably wouldn't have. In London, where we were signed, we used to go hang out at the London Warner Brothers office and see bands coming in and out, certain artists anyway. Derek Taylor who was the Beatles press-op manager in the days of Beatlemania and everything. He had gotten a high-ranking job at the Warner's office there, so he'd always have artists in there. We met Harry Nilsson in there. George Harrison was in there, and Bill Wyman. I remember people coming and going.
Wow.
But no, Black Sabbath I wouldn't have. I mean, there were certain bands that you could tell by the singer-songwriter thing that we were doing, Black Sabbath wouldn't have been in our orbit at that time.
Yeah, no, I was more the Warner Brothers thing. I was just thinking, because we had just had Pat Simmons of the Doobies on. He was just talking about like Van Halen and different ways that Ted Templeman had connected them to artists that you wouldn't really associate them with, I guess.
Yeah. We were following the industry and the trade magazines and listening to as much music as we could, but we just weren't always rubbing shoulders. We were working an awful lot. That's one thing David Geffen did before we barely settled in. By the way, after living with him, we got apartments, lived in the same apartment building like college kids. But he immediately was organizing big tours, and we were playing the big arenas and those first couple of tours I mentioned earlier with Jackson and J.D. were huge tours. So we were on the road, and there wasn't a lot of hanging out over at Warner Brothers or any other artists for that matter.
Nah, you were working, man. You were working, and a lot of people know that the HIC, and then later called the NBC Arena, and then finally just called the Blaisdell, has been a big part of it.
Yeah.
And the concert hall now.
Absolutely. The first year, I believe that first tour we ended there at Blaisdell or HIC, whatever we want to call it now.
Did you do Diamond Head ever?
Yeah, we've been coming since then.
You ever do Diamond Head?
Yeah, we did the Diamond Head Festival, one of those big ones. In a chartered plane. It's funny you mention that because I've been digging up these YouTube clips of Sly and the Family Stone, and I always remember he was on that plane walking up and down the aisle. It was a chartered plane, so all the bands, Cheech and Chong, I know, were there on the plane with us. And
yeah, because they played at the same festival, is what you're saying, all of you guys.
Yeah. And we had David Cassidy with us, we'd gotten friendly with David Cassidy through the photographer Henry Diltz, who was kind of the house photographer at Geffen Roberts at Lookout Management. He took a lot of those covers, CSN covers and Joni Mitchell covers and The Doors. And he was working with David Cassidy at that point. We got to know him, and he came over for that festival just to hang out, I remember. And
you guys are all on a chartered plane, just all the rock bands. Was Billy Preston at that one? I can't remember. I used to have a poster of that one that you're talking.
You know what? I think he might have been. Yeah, now that you mention it. There was another singer-songwriter. I can't remember his name. He was sitting in front of me in my row. I forgot his name. I'm sorry.
No,
it was a fun thing. And we all stayed in this one house, a pink house. It was like a corporate house or a corporate name. It was great. I remember that somehow pretty vividly.
The Royal Hawaiian.
Then we'd stay at the Hilton Hawaiian Village a lot.
Oh, wow.
Over there on the other side of the island, Jerry would know. He remembers.
Yeah, the Kahala.
Yeah, the Kahala Hilton. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that would have been a. So those are great memories. And any other, as we say goodbye, any other Hawaii memories that as people getting excited to see you with all these fun?
Well, you know, I mean, the biggest Hawaiian memory is that we made an album there over on Kauai.
Harbor.
We made our Harbor album, yeah. And that was huge because we were there for a month. It was over Thanksgiving, and we spent a lot of Warner Brothers money on that trip. George Martin and Jeff Emmerich was engineering, came over, our whole band, our whole crew, our wives, our girlfriends. And at the time, we had a road manager whose brother lived on the island, the Harder brothers. It was Scott Harder was our road manager. Rick Harder was living there. So he had a lot of the locals help out with I think we rented 4 or 5 houses. We had one big house that George Martin converted the big living room into a studio. Wow. It was a big production thing. The record didn't do quite as well as it should have to pay for all that, but it was a great memory.
Yeah, I thought, Jerry, one time I thought you guys said maybe you even barged over equipment or something like that to that island.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. Because they had to get a full working studio stuff over there. I don't know how else they would have. Couldn't have flown big 16-track, 24-track machines and stuff. That was in the days of 2-inch tape.
Yeah, Ampex.
Analog days.
Ampex 456, the really good stuff. I know what you're talking about.
There you go.
Well, very good. Well, it's going to be April 14th at the MAC, April 15th at the Concert Hall. So many memories with Dewey Bunnell, who's clearly got not only a great place in America, but you're able to do a lot of good storytelling, my brother. It's a lot of fun.
Well, you got me on a good day, I think. I feel pretty good today.
Yeah, you nailed it. I hope you had...
horse.
Say again?
Our horse is here.
Yeah, the horse returned.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you got me on a good day, I said, Dave, because we're pretty feeling good about having our horse here at the house, and it's sunny here instead of rainy. So now you got me thinking about Hawaii.
Well, that's a good thing, and I'm really stoked. You've been so generous, Dewey, and I hope that you feel greatly appreciated because I started talking to you back in 2007. You guys were coming to the arena at the time. Believe it or not. And so it's... I remember.
I remember now. If I saw you, I'd even remember better, but over the phone, it's always different.
No, I'll see you when you come. And I hope you had fun, though, today. I hope this was a fun experience for you.
I did, Dave. Thank you very, very much. You made it very easy. Appreciate it.
And stay safe, and thank you again, and we'll look for you. Hopefully we'll be able to maybe get together with Jerry and record a quick thing. And do you guys still do that in the era of COVID, or no longer doing stuff like that?
Everything is tightened up. I have to be honest with you. Everything's tightened up pretty much with backstage. So
I believe it. I don't
know how.
No worries.
It's 50-50 that we could do anything, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
All right. You have a great day. Aloha, Dave.
You too. A big aloha. Good luck with the horse, the tortoise, and everything. Take care, Dewey.
The tortoise. All right.
Aloha, brother.
Bye for now.